Continuing in the book of Isaiah, if you want to open up to Isaiah chapter 9, I think the major theme we see in this next chapter is the light dawning. What we find in the first 5 chapters was setting up the situation and the condition spiritually of Judah. Judah is the southern kingdom, Israel, the 10 northern tribes. We also have the situation going on where we have a king that has died, Uzziah. Uzziah's death after 52 years of stability has created a lot of concern. At that time, chapter 6, we see where at the time of the death of Uzziah, that Isaiah himself is called up to heaven, has a vision of where he then receives this great commission to go forward and to spread this message. The message is not going to be well received. People have already set their hearts against God and following him. And so they're going to suffer through that consequence of not obeying him and following him. And one of the things that we see is this hope, though, during judgment. You know, this morning I got a little tongue-tied in trying to explain, looking at justice and mercy. And I don't know, I think I caught myself and might have straightened it back out a little bit. But, oh, I'm getting hand signs. Okay. There. I got a movie director up there. I moved myself that way this morning because of the slide. Okay. There we go. At least I noticed a lot of times they're trying to tell me something upstairs and I'm like oblivious to what's going on. Okay. So one of the things that we see is this idea of justice. Everybody wants justice. We want justice. I've been injured. I want, my rights restored, or if something's been harmed, we want restoration. And so that's why we have law. We have laws that come in and say you can't do certain things to people. And so the law comes in and we want justice for being victimized. And so justice is to help to restore, not just to give vengeance. But then justice without mercy is vengeance in a way. There's no other side to it. There's no balance to it. So when we talk about God's justice, it is in order to also help bring about rightness. Righteousness. Okay, there's the word. There's the religious word, right? Righteousness. We hear that and we go, we go to sleep. We want rightness. We want things to be right. God is right. God is righteousness. He is goodness. And so he cannot tolerate anything that is unrighteous. And in order to do that, he has to establish justice, and he has to bring forward justice. And justice then is going to have consequences. But then you also, to have a balance to that, mercy. God is merciful, and so he shows mercy. This book is all about, a lot of ways, God's bringing forward a part of his character of justice and mercy. And the way that God brings that out is going to establish righteousness. So these are characteristic traits that I always talk about that, a lot of times we forget about who is God. What is God? We read the New Testament, we have our salvation in the gospel and Jesus Christ, and we understand that, but we forget about the simplicity of knowing who God is will help you a lot in understanding what's going on. And so there are times when judgment that is bringing justice seems harsh. And that's what's going to happen. The northern tribes are much further down that slide of apostasy, and judgment's coming on them. God is going to make things right. He's going to make righteousness rule, because that's what he's about. They are already in a moral decay to the point where they will not recover without God coming in as a parent and bringing about some justice on them. Through his justice, righteousness is going to flourish, and he will give mercy. And that's the merciful side you hear in the message. And he has already started to show that. He sends Isaiah in chapter 7 to go and talk to the new king and try to settle him down and tell him, look, don't worry about it. I understand your northern brethren are aligning themselves with Syria, and they're going to come down and they think that they're going to take you on. Don't worry about it. And God knows that, Ahaz has no confidence in God. He's nervous. He's not settled. He's going to reach out and try to make these other alliances all around him in the world. And so he says, ask for a sign. He could have said, make the sun stand still. He could have asked for anything. And Ahaz goes, no, I wouldn't do that. So God says, okay, fine, I'm going to give you one. A virgin will give a child and bring forward. And it's like, wow, okay, if I was King Ahaz, I'd be going, all right, that's real helpful. It's because God, in a sense, was saying, okay, fine, I'm going to reveal something that's going to go so far into the future that in 700 plus years, people are going to look back and refer to this and go, wow. And he's already brought up this idea of Emmanuel. God is with you. And this concept that when God, Emmanuel, is with you, you always win. The child's name will be Emmanuel. God will be with you. And we started seeing that beautiful tapestry being weaved about how that is going to show that Jesus Christ is our Emmanuel. He is with us. And when he's with us, we win. So this turmoil is political, but it's also a spiritual darkness. In the prophets, we see that these times of darkness are overwhelming. And judgment, that when it comes, it's dark. I remember getting punished, as a child, and the world was dark. Everything was horrible. The end times. My dad did this and whooped me, and and I could see nothing but dark and horrible times. And that's the perception spiritually that's going on with the nation. They're going to go through this very, very dark time. And that's what he's going to give them in this turmoil of spiritual darkness and political upheaval that he promises, God promises, I'm going to bring this king. I'm going to bring out. Now, remember again, like I keep saying this, we have to look at, when you read the prophets so often are giving a direct application of a message to the people that are alive right then and there. And it's meaningful and it's applicable. But he's also talking to you and me. Thousands of years later, he is showing us the beauty of his judgment and how he brought righteousness through, and how merciful he is. And so us 2,000 years later, 2,500 years later, we could sit and look and go, amen, God, glorious God he is. Because now we have Emmanuel with us. And so this light is going to come through this king he's going to talk about. And so this theme of this chapter really is God's promised deliverance through this Messiah. So this is why whenever writers and people talk about how many times Isaiah is pulled into the New Testament, and the writers referring to Isaiah, Jesus himself quoting from Isaiah, we're going to see that tonight, that it's hard to not see the link of how complete God, his prophet Isaiah, had spoke, and how hundreds of years later it fit, it worked. It was exactly as God said. So let's jump into verses 1 and 2. Now, the first part of it we're going to hit pretty tight because it does talk about specifically, and then the last part of this chapter is going to deal with more of the gloom of it. So we're going to focus in kind of on the first part. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought her into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea and the land beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them has the light shone. So this is where he talks about this gloom, but there. This is a link to going back to chapter 8 when he described this deep despair and spiritual darkness that's going to come upon them because of this judgment. And then this is where mercy, he says, but there will be no gloom for her. Now, who is her? Her are those the end of Israel and Judah that are going to see this light come. And so in the former time, he had brought about this judgment upon him. Now he focuses geographically. It's interesting the way that he comes about and brings this and talks about that this is going to be Zebulun and Naphtali. Now this is two of the tribes that are in a local area that is very close on the border of Syria. Now, a part of this picture that had been shown already is how Assyria, Nineveh, King Tiglath-Pileser, and then his son Sennacherib are going to come down and invade Syria and the northern tribes. Guess who's on the edge of that? It's going to be Nebula, Asher, and East Manasseh. But he's focusing, because what's interesting, we'll see that is the Galilean region. Galilee, starting to get a picture of looking way to the future about Jesus, right? And if you look, I've got it up there, this fulfillment in Matthew 4, starting in verse 12. And now when he had heard, this is Jesus, when he had heard about John the Baptist being arrested. Now when Jesus had heard, when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to where? Into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and he lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in the darkness, seeing a great light. And for those dwelling in the region and the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. And from that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So you see that in the prophecy, in this map here we are 700 years before this. God is showing this picture of what's going to occur and how this Emmanuel, this Messiah, this King, this light bearer is going to come forward and where? And it says right there, right after the arrest of John the Baptist, Jesus went where? He went right up into this region in order to what? To fulfill what the prophet Isaiah had said, that's where he started his ministry. Now, the one thing, I'm going to back up into the verse here. When we see there, it says, the latter time. It's not very specific. Now, Daniel, if you go later on, now Daniel hasn't been written yet, but Daniel's going to give them a more specific time of when these times, this latter times. So before they had been punished, his later time is glorious. And this light is going to come. You notice it says, beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. This is an allusion to also looking at the way that this is going to make contact with the nations and the Gentiles. And we see some sporadic interactions where Gentiles have had contact and giving this illusion of the promise that goes all the way back to Abraham. Remember, Abraham in Genesis was told that he was going to be the father of many nations, that it was going to come from him and it was going to touch this. So we can thread this all the way back. It's beautiful. And here we see that Jesus then is fulfilling this in Matthew chapter 4. Jesus also in John 10, he talks about how that there are many other children he has from other nations. And so we see this fulfillment that is coming about, and it starts with this picture being drawn by the prophet Isaiah. He says, you have multiplied, in verse 3, the nation. You have increased its joy. This is the effect of the gospel as Jesus comes into Galilee and he starts healing people and people start seeing the light and the joy that is brought about. He says, as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil, for the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken on this day as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle, Turmut has, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for fire. Just a picture of the victory that is going to happen. And the idea that God is going to multiply the nations and increase this joy. This is races. A lot of times we see nations, we think of these extreme boundaries, but really this is an expansion beyond the Hebrews and going on and expanding out to all the other nations as well. And comparing this harvest to this great victory of what the gospel is going to have this effect. And God shattering the foes. This is alluded to as well in Ephesians and also in Colossians that we've been going through about how Christ had become victorious over all rule and principalities in defeating Satan and defeating all the powers that were trying to rule people and oppressing them. And this victory spiritually was going to occur. In 6, he gets very specific. This is something we're familiar. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forward and forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Just look at this coming king. You know, when we look at this, the child is born. Who is this? The other thing we see is divine in nature, and yet human as well. This is the duality again that, you know, has been so controversial that I don't understand. When you go to Isaiah and you go to the prophets, when you go to the New Testament and what Paul is teaching, he was God and he was flesh. And here again, we see this in the titles alone. You know, mighty God. You're going to call him a mighty God? Everlasting means eternal. This Messiah, this Emmanuel is a mighty God. He is an eternal Father, the Prince of Peace. You notice that the way that he shows this growth of this kingdom is something very unusual. If you were somebody that was living during this time, you had never witnessed such a nation that could have such an effect, so an everlasting. No nation has ever lasted forever. All the nations would rise up and get beat by another nation. Another one would rise up and it would be beaten. And so this is unique. This is something that, of course, they love to hear. The Hebrews would love to hear this. Finally, and then they link it to David. You can see almost how that when Jesus came, how people were looking, for one that was from the tribe of Judah, that was a descendant of David. And what was he going to do? Man, he was going to whoop the Romans. He was going to come in and push off all these other nations, destroy them all, and just continue forever and ever and ever and ever. Forever. And they missed it, didn't they? They kept looking for this physical nation. This is what Daniel had talked about, and how that there would be this fourth and final kingdom that would come, that would destroy all the others. And it was a very unique one, and that it would never again, ever be beaten. The peace that it would multiply was going to be a peace because of the gospel message. It wasn't going to be because it submitted the physical governments and the physical people into submission, but the fact that it would continue to spread and keep going and bringing this reconciliation between men and God the Father himself. And his reign would be forever. Christ is now ruling, and he is just. And Jesus filled every one of those. And so let's go to 8 through 21. The Lord has sent a word against Jacob. Now, Jacob is representing all of the tribes, all the children, all the sons of Jacob were all the tribes. So this is a word against them. So now he's coming back to the punishment side of it. And it will fall on Israel. And all the people will know, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say in pride and in arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen, but we will build it with dressed stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will put cedars in their place. But the Lord raises the adversaries of Rezin against him, and stirs up his enemies. The Syrians on the east and the Philistines on the west devour Israel with open mouth. For all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. So God is bringing this message against them, and yet then the people are going to turn around and feel like, oh, well, we can just rebuild. Okay, you tore it down, you attacked us, you destroyed our city. That's okay. We'll be able to overcome this. And God's basically saying, no, you're not. You are not. You're going, the northern tribes are going to be devoured. And they were devoured viciously, taken off the land, dispersed and spread out to all the different nations that were dominated by Assyria. And he, though, raising up these enemies, stirring them up, and yet they're not going to be able to turn away from it. And so this last phrase there, his hand is stretched out still. In other words, it's still out there. God, this is showing the plan is in action. It's coming. And so the people did not turn to him who struck them, nor inquire of the Lord of hosts. This was a problem we saw in the previous chapter, where people, when they saw this political upheaval, and after the king died, Uzziah, they start seeking out mediums and spiritualists and all these different directions. And yet they did nothing but deepen their darkness, as Isaiah described. So the Lord cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. The elder and honored man is the head, and the prophet who teaches lies is the tail. So he just described who's who, and he said they've all been cut off. They're going to be removed, and it's going to be swift. Maybe not a literal day, but the idea is quick. It's not something that's going to hang out and just keep happening, but it's going to be a very quick judgment when it comes. For those who guide this people have been leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are swallowed up. Therefore the Lord does not rejoice over their young men, and has no compassion on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. You know, sin has a terrible effect at all levels. The effects of those people who are responsible for guiding them and directing them in the ways of God has taken and destroyed these people, all their families. Every level and every fiber of this society has been corrupted by sin. And so God has no compassion on them because of it. He is done with them. This is a dark picture to hear this. You'd think, well, okay, well, you know, have some compassion on the fatherless, the orphans, the widows, you know what I mean? No, he says every one of them. We look at this, and a lot of times people say, well, that's the hate God. That's the God, you know, that is so mean. No, remember what I started out with, talking about justice. At our level and the way that we view things are so limited, and at such a different level than the way God sees the total picture. And so when he is bringing this, remember, his righteousness has mercy. There is mercy. There has been mercy there all along, but they have rejected it. And so now you're going to look out and you're going to say, well, man, it's barbaric. I mean, what he is doing to the fatherless, to the orphans, to the widows, and all that's going on. But they're godless, they're evil. He said it is all, every mouth. And it really, he's showing how bad it has started at the top, and they've just consumed all the people below them. And they're definitely, he says, so their wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. It kindles the thickets of the forest, and they roll upward in a column of smoke. What a graphic picture. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched, and the people are like fuel for the fire, and no one spares another. They slice meat on the right, but they are still hungry. They devour on the left, but they're not satisfied. Each devours the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devours Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. Together they are against Judah. For all of this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is still stretched out. You know that? You see that? God is not relenting, in other words. It's kind of like me trying to talk my dad into saying, okay, you can whip my brothers because they definitely deserve it, but stop. There's got to be a point where, okay, I'm not a part of this, No, justice has to happen to correct the wrong, to bring back something back to the right status, condition that it needs to be in. And you look at the picture. This is a disgusting really this is kind of a shadowing of the cannibalism, some of the cannibalism stories that were depicted in some of these seizing, when they would seize a city and they would starve them out, that people literally would start devouring each other, and the things that they would do. Josephus, this is way up into 70 AD, when Jerusalem was seized, describing some of the horrific things that people were doing to each other, and even mothers taking their babies, their own babies, and killing them and eating them. They're just this is the type of story that we are hearing about, we read about, that happened in Jerusalem, but yet we look at this picture as well. Scorching the land, just nothing left. There's nothing there. And so 8 through 21 is this great judgment, a shift from that hope to a judgment, an oracle against that northern kingdom specifically. Now remember, Judah, he very clearly did bring up the fact that Judah in the south is going to get touched. And that was one of the things that the Assyrians did, is they came further south into Judah, started actually raiding and conquering some of the cities. But as he described, remember I talked about the river, the way that Isaiah was describing, that the river was going to come out of its banks. Euphrates was a symbol of showing how Assyria was going to have this raging water that was going to come over and destroy. They had rejected the silo water, the gentle water from Jerusalem from God, but he said it's going to come up to the neck. Judah's going to be right there up to their neck in this. They're going to come very close. God is giving them hope. He's showing them, you're going to witness what I'm going to do to the north, and you're going to get to that real close point. And you're going to be up there. You would think somebody who survived a flood would not want that to happen again, right? You don't want to experience that. But the sad part is, Judah didn't learn. This is Isaiah trying to help Judah, showing them this picture of what's going to happen. And the big thing, this refrain that's like a chorus almost, keeps coming up, is that, no, his anger is not turned away. It's too late. It's too late. You're not going to be able to just talk him out of it. His hand is still raised in judgment. His call towards that repentance is still there. And that's something that is key when we look at the sins that he's addressing here, is this pride and arrogance. That hasn't changed a bit. Pride and arrogance, that you think that you can survive and you can exist without God, without following after what God wants. Even today, people, the world leaders throughout this, think that they're in charge, think that somehow that they can abuse the people, the citizens of their nations. And again, if you go back and study history, you will see how some of the most barbaric rulers, where are they now? I mean, we look at Stalin, look at Hitler. Okay, yeah, I know. I saw a preacher one time was preaching. We're getting some thunder here, lightning, and the whole building shook or something, and the preacher just stopped and he looked up like that. It's like, okay, Lord, did I say something wrong? But that's one of the things, trusting in ourselves and not trusting in God is one of the great messages. And the unfaithful leadership is so key. And the tolerance of unfaithful leadership. When you know they're wrong, we have some responsibility, especially, like today in local congregations, when you have leaderships and spiritual leaders that are sinning and they're not faithful, you got to do something. And that's the beauty of, honestly, if you look at the local congregations, is the power that they have, that we're not masters over you, leaders, and they're not. We are just as accountable to God as everybody else because of the danger allowing yourself to be swallowed up as well. So you see this social division and internal strife, whereas they should have been united. I mean, they all are Abraham's descendants. They should have been joined together. This tribal type of hostility, that these are things, I think I kind of wrapped it up and try to summarize that. Those three basic things are the things that you see coming out in this chapter. The pride and arrogance, the unfaithfulness of the leadership that was there, and this social division and internal strife that was they were eating themselves apart and causing this division as well. What a complex chapter, when you think about it, how beautiful. He starts out in showing this hope and this beauty, and then to turn around and then have to show what he has to do to them because of their evil and in their hardened heart. So that's chapter 9. So we'll continue next time in chapter 10. If there's somebody here with us this evening that we can assist in your relationship with God by either establishing it and becoming a Christian, accepting his gentle call to try to come and to bring ourselves back, have the heart that's humble enough to listen. As we sing this song, I hope that if we can help you at all, you would let us know. And if you're comfortable, come forward while we stand and sing.